You are the emotional one in this marriage, Natalie. So, be grateful when I only take half. My lawyer husband, Grant, said that to me in a low, confident voice at the courthouse, 13 minutes into the hearing where he thought he had already outplayed me. A few minutes later, the judge opened the envelope I handed over, and the color drained so fast from Grant's face that even his mother stopped breathing for a second. As always, before we dive into a story with an ending that's going to feel really satisfying for you, let's do a quick roll call. Type present and the city you're watching from in the comments. For everyone who has liked and subscribed, I pray that God makes your problems easier, widens your provision, and keeps your body healthy. Thank you, my friends. Now, listen carefully to my story. Before I tell you how a man who built his whole career on controlling the room ended up staring at me like he had never known me at all, you need to understand something first. People like my husband never lose because they are careless. They lose because one day, after underestimating the same woman for too long, they forget she has been quietly learning the whole game. I'm Natalie Parker, and for most of my life, I was known as the dependable daughter. I was the oldest child in a family that looked ordinary from the outside. My dad, Robert Parker, taught history at a private high school for almost 30 years, and my mom, Linda Parker, had worked as a pediatric nurse until her back started giving her trouble. We were not rich, not connected, and definitely not the kind of family that belonged in charity galas, political fundraisers, or country club brunches. But, we were solid. We paid our bills. We showed up for each other. We said thank you. We did not humiliate each other for sport. That was probably why I didn't understand the Holloways at first. I met Grant Holloway when I was 29 and working as operations director for a mid-sized property management firm in Chicago. He came in to negotiate on behalf of a developer who was threatening to sue one of our commercial tenants. He was polished, calm, and almost annoyingly composed. He wore dark suits like he had been born in them. He spoke in full sentences without ever stumbling. He looked at people in a way that made them feel examined, not seen. Examined. When he started asking me out, my coworkers acted like I had won some kind of prize. Do you realize how many women in this building are jealous of you right now? My colleague, Vanessa, whispered the first time he brought me coffee and waited in the lobby with a smile that looked expensive. I laughed and told her she was being dramatic, but even I could admit Grant had presence. He knew how to make a woman feel chosen. He remembered the names of my parents after meeting them once. He sent flowers to my mom after her surgery. He asked my dad intelligent questions about history he clearly had no personal interest in, and somehow my dad came away impressed anyway. My younger brother, Caleb, did not trust him. He talks like he's billing by the hour, Caleb said one Sunday after Grant left my parents' house. That's because he's a lawyer, I told him. No. I mean, he talks like every sentence is designed to win. At the time, I rolled my eyes. Caleb had always been protective, the kind of brother who noticed small shifts in tone and remembered details other people missed. But, Grant was attentive, successful, and patient. He never raised his voice. He never forgot my birthday. He never showed up unprepared for anything. Compared to the chaotic, emotionally unavailable men some of my friends kept dating, he seemed like stability in human form. We got married 14 months after we met. The first 6 months of marriage looked good from the outside, too. We moved into Grant's townhouse in an upscale suburb just outside the city, a beautiful place with tall windows, slate gray walls, and furniture that somehow made you nervous to sit down. He told me we could redecorate together, but every time I suggested changing something, he would smile and say, "Let's not rush to erase what already works." That sentence followed me more than I realized. At first, the odd things were so small they almost felt petty to notice. Grant had a rule about where my shoes could go near the front entry. Another rule about which guests needed advanced notice. Another rule about how often my parents could stop by. He said it in a way that sounded practical, never cruel. "We need structure, Natalie," he would tell me. "A calm house doesn't happen by accident." I believed him because I wanted to believe marriage meant adapting, not resisting. His mother, Sylvia Holloway, lived 20 minutes away and appeared in our home with the confidence of someone who considered it partly hers. She was elegant in that cold way some women are, with silver blonde hair that never moved and a voice so smooth it took a second to realize she was insulting you. The first time she came over after the wedding, I had spent 3 hours cooking. Nothing fancy. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, a lemon tart. My mother had taught me that feeding people warmly was a kind of love. Sylvia took one bite of the potatoes, dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin, and said, "Well, you're clearly trying." I smiled because I thought maybe I had imagined the tone. Then she added, "Grant's always had refined tastes, but adjustment is part of marriage, I suppose." Grant gave a short laugh. Not mean. Not loud. Worse than that. Casual. I remember standing there with the serving spoon still in my hand and feeling the tiniest crack open somewhere under my ribs. Later that night, I said, "Your mother doesn't seem to like me." Grant loosened his tie, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at me like I had misunderstood a simple math problem. "She likes standards," he said. "Don't make it personal." That was the first time he made me feel embarrassed for reacting instead of concerned about what caused the reaction. After that, I started noticing patterns. Sylvia always praised women who were somehow the opposite of me. Women from good legal families. Women who understood how to carry a name properly. Women who knew when to stay quiet in a room full of professionals. She talked about daughters of judges, wives of surgeons, women who hosted perfect fundraisers while somehow raising perfect children with perfect manners. One evening, after a dinner at her house where she spent 20 minutes admiring another attorney's wife for knowing how to support a man's career without constantly centering herself, I asked Grant in the car if his mother had always been so invested in who belonged in his life. He kept his eyes on the road. "My mother wants the best for me. And I'm what? A compromise?" He sighed like I had exhausted him. "Natalie, not every conversation is an attack. The thing is, I wasn't weak and I wasn't stupid. I handle contracts worth millions at work. I supervise difficult staff. I fix problems every day. But, inside that marriage, I kept assuming good faith because I loved him and because intelligent abuse doesn't begin with slamming doors. It begins with making you doubt whether the door was even closed on you at all. A few months later, we found out I was pregnant. I still remember the look on my dad's face when I told my parents. He cried immediately and tried to pretend he had something in his eye. My mother held my hands and kissed my forehead like I was still 12. Caleb spun me around in the kitchen and nearly dropped me, then panicked so badly my mom yelled at him. For one bright week, I thought maybe this would settle everything. Grant was pleased, but in a strangely formal way. He kissed me, touched my stomach, and started discussing schools before I had even finished my first prenatal appointment. Sylvia sent flowers with a card that read, "Wonderful news for the Holloway line." Not for us. Not for me. For the line. Still, I tried to see the best in it. Then, at 9 weeks, I lost the pregnancy. There is a silence that enters a woman's life after something like that, and it does not leave quickly. It sits in the corners of your home. It follows you into the shower. It comes back when you wake up and realize, for one soft second, that you forgot. I was devastated. Grant was kind for about 4 days. Then, he became impatient with my grief in the same organized way he did everything else. "You need routine," he told me on the 5th morning, standing in the doorway while I sat at the kitchen table staring at tea I had not touched. "Staying in this emotional state is only making recovery harder." I looked up at him and said, "This emotional state is grief." His jaw tightened. "I know that. I'm saying there's a point where grief becomes indulgence." I don't think I will ever forget those words. I turned back to work after 3 weeks because I needed air, noise, movement, something that wasn't that house. My boss, Mr. Anderson, let me ease back in slowly. Vanessa started leaving protein bars in my desk drawer because I kept forgetting to eat. Little human kindnesses kept me upright. At home, I got precision instead of comfort. Then came the first obvious humiliation. It happened at Sylvia's birthday dinner at one of those long, polished tables where every fork has a job and every smile hides something. There were 12 of us there. Sylvia and Arthur Holloway at the head of the table. Grant beside me. His younger sister, Laura, across from us with her husband, Dean. Two of Grant's law partners, an old family friend named Margaret Sinclair, who used the word pedigree in normal conversation. Even before the main course, I could feel that familiar pressure in the room, like I was about to be measured. Sylvia had been drinking enough wine to sharpen her honesty, but not enough to blur it. Margaret asked, in that fake gentle tone people use when they want information disguised as concern, "Natalie, how are you feeling these days?" Before I could answer, Sylvia rested her glass near her plate and said, "We all hope the next time goes better." These things are unfortunate, but some women are built for pressure more than others. The whole table went very still. I said, carefully, "Loss is hard for any woman." Sylvia smiled, "Of course, but legacy matters in families like ours. Emotions are understandable. Results are what shape the future." I felt heat crawl up my neck. "I'm not a failed investment, Sylvia." Lauren looked down at her plate immediately. Dean took a sip of water. One of Grant's partners pretended sudden interest in the bread basket. Grant put his hand lightly on my wrist under the table, which might have looked comforting to anyone else. It wasn't. It was a warning. "Let's not turn dinner into theater," he said. I stared at him. "Your mother is talking about my miscarriage like it was a bad quarterly report." Sylvia gave a tiny laugh. "See? This is what I mean. Too reactive." I waited for Grant to defend me. He did not. Instead, he leaned back and said, "Mom, maybe we can change the subject." That was it. That weak little sentence. Not "Stop talking to my wife like that." Not "That was cruel." Just a polite reroute, as if the problem was the topic, not the insult. I went to the bathroom because if I stayed at that table another minute, I was going to cry in front of people who would treat my tears like proof of instability. Inside that bathroom, with its marble counter and expensive hand soap that smelled like cedar, I locked the door and pressed both hands against the sink. My face looked pale and unfamiliar in the mirror. I remember whispering, "Pull yourself together," but the words sounded like they belonged to somebody else. When I came back out, the conversation had moved on. Of course it had. Wealthy, cruel people are very good at resuming normalcy. Later, in the car, I said quietly, "You let her do that." Grant kept driving. I prevented it from escalating. "No, you protected her from consequences." He exhaled through his nose, already annoyed. "Natalie, you need to stop interpreting every unpleasant moment as malice. She humiliated me in front of your law partners." She made an insensitive comment. "That is not the same as humiliation unless you decide it is." That line stayed with me. "Unless you decide it is." That was Grant's specialty. Taking something real, flattening it, and handing it back to me so cleanly worded that for one dangerous second, I would almost question my own reaction. After that dinner, the house changed. Or maybe I changed enough to finally see it. Grant began closing his office door more often when he worked from home. He started taking late-night calls on the back patio. If I asked who it was, he always had an answer ready. Senior partner. Client crisis. A judge's clerk returning a call. Emergency filing. Every answer technically plausible, none of them warm. Money also started getting strange. We had separate accounts and one shared household account, which had been Grant's idea before marriage. At the time, it seemed sensible. Independent adults, clear boundaries, efficient planning. But around that period, I noticed larger transfers leaving the joint account than usual. Not enough to cause alarm right away, but enough to make me pause. When I asked about them, Grant said, "Tax adjustments and retainers. You don't need to concern yourself with the mechanics." I said, "It's our household account." He looked up from his laptop. And I'm handling the household. That answer irritated me more than I showed. The next day at work, during lunch, I logged into the account again and started reviewing the last 3 months. There were payments to a consulting firm I didn't recognize, a boutique hotel downtown, and a private investigator's office. A private investigator. I stared at the charge for a long time. That evening, I didn't mention it right away. I waited until dinner, until he had relaxed enough to think the day was normal. "What's Halstead Investigative Services?" I asked, tearing a piece of bread. Grant's fork paused for less than a second. "A firm." Clearly for the first time. I was not inside a difficult marriage. I was inside a legal strategy. Still, I kept quiet. That was not fear. That was the first intelligent decision I made for myself in a long time. I called my brother Caleb from the grocery store parking lot the next morning. He answered on the second ring. "Nat." I started crying before I could speak. He was quiet for a second, then said very calmly, "Tell me where you are." An hour later, I was sitting in Caleb's apartment with a cup of tea I didn't want while he looked through the photos on my phone with a kind of stillness that meant he was furious. He didn't interrupt much. He asked dates. He asked who knew what. He asked whether Grant had ever pushed me, threatened me directly, or tried to isolate me from Mom and Dad. He asked if there were cameras in the house. He asked if I had backups of the photos. When I finished, he rubbed a hand over his face and said, "You are not confronting him alone." "I'm pregnant," I whispered. "If I move too fast and he files first, he's already planning to file first." "I know." That was the worst part. I knew. Caleb leaned forward. "Then you stop thinking like his wife and start thinking like the operations director you were before he turned her home into a courtroom." I looked at him, and for the first time in months something inside me straightened. He helped me make a plan that afternoon. Back up everything. Keep acting normal. Get independent legal advice quietly. Tell Mom and Dad only what they needed to know for now. Do not argue in writing. Do not accuse without evidence. Do not let Grant know I had seen the documents. I asked Caleb, "What if I'm too late?" He said, "Then we get earlier." The next person I told was not a friend. It was a lawyer. Her name was Tessa Reed, and she had once negotiated a brutal real estate dispute against one of our company's outside firms. She was sharp, unsentimental, and known for two things: preparation and patience. When I called and asked if she could meet privately, she didn't waste time with concerned performance. "Tonight," she said. "Bring copies, not originals." We met in her office after hours. I remember the hum of the air vent, the smell of paper and coffee, and how ordinary the room felt compared to the panic in my chest. Tessa studied everything I gave her in silence. Finally, she looked up and said, "Your husband is either preparing a divorce with unusually aggressive custody tactics, or he's creating pressure so severe that you break first and make his narrative easier. Can he do that?" "He can try." She tapped one of the photos with her pen. "This language is deliberate. He wants you categorized before you even know there's a category being built." I swallowed. "What do I do?" "First, you stop assuming the truth will protect you by itself. Truth needs records, timing, and witnesses." That sentence changed me. Over the next 2 weeks, I began living a double life. In one version, I was still the wife Grant expected: controlled, tired, quiet, pregnant, a little sad, a little dependent, increasingly uncertain. I let him believe he still knew the map of my mind. In the other version, I documented everything. I kept screenshots. I exported account statements. I photographed notes. I saved call logs. I recorded dates of Sylvia's visits. I wrote down exact phrases after ugly conversations. Tessa guided me carefully, always staying inside the law, always reminding me that intelligent men in expensive suits lost cases every day because they mistook confidence for immunity. Then Sylvia came over on a rainy Thursday afternoon and made her boldest move yet. Grant was still at work. I was alone in the house folding laundry in the den when she walked in with her own key. "I didn't know you were coming," I said. "You don't need to entertain me," she replied, taking off her gloves. "I'm family." There was something in her tone that made me set the laundry down. She sat across from me and looked around the room with that practiced expression of mild disappointment. "I'm going to say something difficult," she said, "and I suggest you hear it as guidance, not cruelty." I said nothing. She crossed one leg over the other. "Grant has carried this marriage for a long time." I almost laughed at the audacity, but I stayed quiet. She continued, "He has protected your dignity in ways you don't fully appreciate." My hands went cold. "In what ways?" Her smile was tiny. "Men in his position have options. Good ones. Better aligned ones. But he stayed loyal to his vows even when your moods, your grief and your instability made his life much harder than it needed to be." There it was again. Instability. Always circling back. Always being planted. I said very evenly, "You should be careful about using clinical words when you're not a doctor." She ignored that. "If you care about your child," she said, glancing pointedly at my stomach, "then you should make this easy. Cooperative women keep access. Difficult women force outcomes they later regret." For 1 second all the sound in the room went thin. "You're threatening me." "No," she said lightly. "I'm giving you a realistic preview." I looked straight at her and asked, "Does Grant know you came here to say this?" She held my gaze and smiled again. That was answer enough. When she left, I stood in the middle of the den for almost a full minute staring at the door she had closed behind her. Then I walked to the hallway table, opened the decorative bowl where Grant tossed his keys and loose change, and found exactly what I suspected: a small digital recorder. Not hidden well. Hidden to be found later if needed. Either he had left it there carelessly or he wanted a chance that I might say something emotional near it. Maybe both. I didn't touch it. Instead, I called Tessa. By the end of the call we had adjusted the timeline. We could not wait for Grant to choose the battlefield anymore. But before I could move, he did. 3 days later he asked me to meet him in his office downtown to talk privately like adults. The message sounded calm, respectful, even. I already knew enough by then to fear calm more than anger. When I walked into that office the next afternoon, Sylvia was there. So was Arthur. So was a junior associate with a legal pad. Grant stood by the window in a navy suit, composed as ever, and said, "Natalie, thank you for coming." I looked from one face to another and realized this was not a conversation. It was a proceeding. He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. We need to discuss the future in a constructive way." I stayed standing for 1 extra second before sitting down. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my face stayed still. Grant slid a neat stack of papers across the polished table. "I've prepared a proposal that allows us to separate with dignity," he said. My eyes moved to the title page. "Petition for dissolution of marriage, temporary custody recommendations, asset preservation motions." For a moment, I could not hear anything. Then Sylvia said softly, almost kindly, "This is for the best." I lifted my head and looked at my husband. And that was the moment I understood that whatever one of our clients uses, it was paid from our joint account. He took a sip of water. "Temporary bookkeeping error. Why is there also a hotel charge? Client entertainment. From our personal account." His expression hardened almost invisibly. "Natalie, you are not cross-examining me in my own kitchen. No, I'm asking why money from our home is paying for your professional life." He put down his fork with controlled precision. "Because sometimes financial lines overlap. This is exactly why I usually handle these matters without involving you. You create panic before context." That phrase again. You create panic. I let the conversation drop, but only outwardly. The next morning, before leaving for work, I opened the drawer in his office looking for a charger I knew he kept there. I had never searched through my husband's things before, and I hated the feeling of it. But the account charges kept buzzing in my mind. I found the charger under a folder labeled Domestic Assets Summary. At first, I thought it was work-related. Then I saw my name. My full legal name. I sat down in Grant's leather office chair and read the first page so fast I almost missed what it meant. It was a draft memo. Not filed. Not final, but detailed. It listed marital assets, separate assets, projected spousal support exposure, reputational vulnerabilities, and strategic recommendations in the event of dissolution. Dissolution. My marriage was being reduced to tactical language in my husband's desk drawer. My mouth went dry. There were notes in the margin in Grant's handwriting. Emotional volatility can be documented if necessary. Another note said, establish pattern of financial impulsivity. Another, need cleaner timeline before action. Action. I don't know how long I sat there. Then I heard the garage door opening. I shoved the memo back into the folder, put the charger in my bag to make my reason for being there look real, and barely made it to the kitchen before Grant walked in again, frowning. I forgot my deposition binder, he said. I looked up from the counter and forced my face still. It's probably in your office. He held my gaze half a second too long. That night, I barely slept. Every sentence from the memo replayed in my head. Emotional volatility. Cleaner timeline. Financial impulsivity. I wanted to believe there was some explanation. Maybe he had drafted it for a client and used my information as a placeholder. Maybe I had misread context. Intelligent women do not want to believe they are being handled by the men they love. That is one of the cruelest parts. The smarter the manipulation, the longer you waste your intelligence trying to explain it in a more harmless way. A week later, I got pregnant again. This time I didn't feel uncomplicated joy. I felt hope with fear wrapped around it. The pregnancy was more fragile. My doctor, Dr. Melissa Bennett, advised more rest, less stress, more monitoring. Grant was attentive again, but it was the same attentive he had been before. Polished, strategic, oddly timed. Sylvia immediately became sweeter, too, which somehow unsettled me more than her hostility. At lunch one day, she reached across the table at a restaurant and squeezed my hand. We all want peace now, she said softly. Let's put old misunderstandings behind us. I pulled my hand back slowly. That would require them to be misunderstandings. Her smile did not move. You can be very difficult to help, Natalie. 2 days later, I had a prenatal blood panel done. Routine, mostly, but while I was checking out, the receptionist handed me a sealed envelope that was apparently meant for the doctor's internal review copy. She apologized and asked for it back, but not before I caught a glimpse of one page partially visible through the opening. It showed a note about paternity confirmation protocol due to a prior lab coding discrepancy from my earlier pregnancy records. A coding discrepancy. Something about that bothered me immediately because no one had ever mentioned such an issue to me before. When I asked Dr. Bennett about it at my next visit, she looked confused, pulled up my prior file, and frowned at the screen. That's strange, she said. There's a lab note here attached to your previous loss workup that shouldn't have been finalized the way it was. What does that mean? It means I want to verify something before I say more. My heart started pounding. Verify what? She hesitated. Natalie, some portions of your old reproductive record appear to have been supplemented by an outside legal request. I stared at her. A legal request? That's what it says here. I'm not comfortable speculating until I pull the full chain of authorization. I left that office with my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. An outside legal request. Grant was a family law attorney. He knew how records moved. He knew what could be framed. He knew what language sounded official enough to stop questions. That night I didn't confront him. I watched. I watched how he moved around the kitchen. I watched him take a call on speaker for exactly 6 seconds before switching it off when I entered. I watched him kiss my forehead and ask whether I had taken my supplements. I watched him ask if I was feeling stable in that careful, clinical tone he used when he wanted a reaction on the record without making it obvious. The next week one of the women in Grant's office called me by mistake. Her name was Julia Barnes and I knew her as one of the associate attorneys in his firm. She sounded flustered. "Natalie, I'm so sorry. I meant to call Grant." "That's okay," I said. "What's going on?" There was a pause. "Nothing. I just had a question about the Holloway file." My stomach dropped. "The Holloway file?" Another pause, longer this time. She corrected herself too quickly. "I mean a client file." "Sorry. Long day." She hung up 30 seconds later, but the damage was done. The Holloway file. Not a client file. Not a random matter. Something under his own name. That weekend I used the excuse of organizing paperwork to go through the home office cabinets while Grant played golf with Arthur. I was smarter about it this time. I took photos instead of removing anything. In the back of a locked file drawer, which he had left half-latched by mistake, I found copies of correspondence between Grant and a private medical records consultant. There were redacted sections but enough remained visible to make my skin go cold. Subject: viability of mental fitness angle. Subject: documentation for custody leverage if pregnancy proceeds. Subject: establish financial recklessness narrative before filing. I took photos of every page I could reach. Then I found something even worse. A draft parenting proposal that assumed I would receive supervised visitation only. I was still pregnant. I had to sit on the floor because the room tilted around me. He was planning for me to become the unstable mother before our child was even born. That evening, when he came home cheerful from golf and asked what I wanted for dinner, I looked at his face and understood something.